Few symbols convey the mysteries of ancient consciousness more potently than the Great Sphinx of Giza. Just south of the Great Pyramid on the west bank of the Nile River, this mythical limestone creature has the body of a lion and the head of a human. The Sphinx is the oldest known monumental sculpture in Egypt. According to mainstream scholars, it was built by ancient Egyptians during the reign of the pharaoh Khafre between the dates 2558 and 2532 BC. But in 1992, author and independent Egyptologist John Anthony West claimed that the Great Sphinx of Giza was not carved in 2500 BC, but 9,000 to 10,000 years earlier, before Egypt was a desert, and even before the dawn of man as we know it. While studying the works of 1920s scholar Schwaller de Lubitz, John Anthony West discovered that conventional Egyptologists had overlooked an important detail. The body of the Sphinx bore distinct markings of water erosion. If it was water erosion, then the entire history of ancient man would have to be rewritten. The conversation was a controversial subject the Oxford geologist didn't want to get involved with. This did little to deter John West from wanting to solve the mystery. If the Great Sphinx of Egypt was built thousands of years earlier than was written in mainstream history, could the water erosion marks he had examined shed new light on the creation of the human race? Determined to find out, John sought other scientists willing to join his quest. His search led him to Professor Robert Schoch, a geologist at Boston University.
I first went to see the Sphinx in 1990, and I noticed immediately that there was a disconnect because the weathering and erosion that I saw on the Sphinx was not compatible with Sahara desert hyper-arid conditions. What I was seeing, I was convinced, was precipitation weathering and erosion from rainfall, from water beating down on it. Now, how do you have that when it's been Sahara desert for 5,000 or more years? So immediately I saw this anomaly, and the logical conclusion I had, again, virtually immediately, was that the Sphinx must go back to an earlier climatic regime.
Can the water erosion marks that John West discovered stand alone to prove the Sphinx was constructed before 2500 BC? In 2008, geoarchaeologists Manashev and Parkhomenko argued that through their research of the analyzation of erosion on the Sphinx, they figured it actually was part of a civilization much older.
Two Ukrainian geologists believe that the Sphinx, which is on the edge of the plateau at Giza, could be as much as 800,000 years old. Why do they believe this? What they propose is that originally the Mediterranean Sea extended all the way to the plateau of Giza and lapped up against the Sphinx to create the distinctive weathering patterns that we see. I think that they could be right about the weathering, but I think that we're talking about the Sphinx before it was actually carved into what we see today. There was a rocky promontory or knoll at that site, which obviously was later used to carve the Sphinx, and that would have had weathering patterns on it. And almost certainly that does date back hundreds of thousands of years and could well have been weathered by water at some point in the past, but certainly that was not in the recent past.
As theories about how old the Sphinx is continue, Robert Schoch has found his research keeps leading him back in time. Since he first traveled to Giza in 1992, Professor Robert Schoch's research has taken his first dating of the Sphinx even further. His most recent geological and seismic findings have convinced him that the Great Sphinx could have been carved as far back as 12,000 years ago. at the end of the last ice age.
We know geologically and from studies of ancient climatology that prior to about 3000, what is now Sahara was much more moist, much more temperate, much more rainfall. So I concluded that had to go back at least to that earlier period. My initial estimate was 5,000 to 7,000 BC. This was very, very radical at the time. The Egyptologists were livid about this. They were saying all kinds of nasty things about me, calling me a pseudoscientist because they said this was absolutely impossible because there's no civilization when you go back to 5,000 to 7,000 BC that could construct the Sphinx. Since then, I've continued my studies. I've carried on with this. I've actually reanalyzed the seismic data, and I'm convinced at this point, for a number of technical reasons, that actually the seismic data suggests that we have to go back to at least around 10,000 BC. And this also fits much better the climatic regime and gives enough time for the erosion and weathering that we're seeing.
When could the Sphinx have been exposed to what turns out, what needs to have been about 1,000 years of very heavy rainfall? But there was no rainfall like that in Egypt in the time of the pharaohs either. The Giza Plateau was as dry 4,500 years ago as it is today. And yet here is a structure that has been heavily weathered by rainfall, which has fallen on it for a long period of time. You have to go back, more than 11,500 years. You have to go back to 12,000 years, really, to get the kind of climate conditions in that part of the Sahara that would have been capable of causing that level of erosion on the Sphinx. The rainfall erosion is most visible on the trench that surrounds the Sphinx. Nobody bothered to restore that. And there you can see this undulating profile and cuts through it. It's classic rainfall-induced weathering. And the Sphinx's body has been repaired again and again down the journey. It wasn't just in the Old Kingdom it was repaired. There were more repairs done in the New Kingdom as well. And right down into more recent times, they're still restoring the core body of the Sphinx today. This alone should have alerted archaeologists to the fact that there's a problem, because some of the most extensive restorations of the Sphinx, when blocks were applied to that rock-hewn core body of the Sphinx to repair damage, some of those date from the Old Kingdom. They date from 2,500 BC. Now, if you made your Sphinx in 2,500 BC, what on earth are you doing restoring it massively in 2000? It should be pristine.
Gregg Braden adds another layer to the dating of the Sphinx.
When we look at the mystery of the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau and the traditional dating of only 4,000 years, where that no longer makes sense is the erosion on the Sphinx has now been proven by Robert Schoch to be fluvial erosion rather than aeolian erosion. And fluvial means vast amounts of water moving quickly over long periods of time, where aeolian erosion would be wind blowing and eroding over long periods of time. Robert Schoch showed beyond any reasonable doubt that it is water erosion that has created the Sphinx. His findings were accepted by AAPG, the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. They looked at the evidence and they said, of course, this makes perfect sense. We have no problem with this. The historians have a huge problem, because the last time there were vast amounts of water moving quickly over long periods of time is when the ice melted from the last ice age, and that is now being dated in that part of Egypt between 7,000 and 9,000 years before present. So I think the evidence strongly supports that the Sphinx was in place when that water was melting. What it doesn't account for is the ice age was there for 20,000 years. Was the Sphinx built before the ice happened and subject to the erosion, or was the Sphinx built while the ice was in place? And we don't know the answer to that yet.
Some researchers suggest that the Sphinx could have been built during the precessional cycle, even before the current one, giving it the date of 36,000 BC.
John Anthony West's view is that actually it's not marking 12,500 years ago. It's marking the precessional cycle before that, the previous age of Leo, which would be 25,920 years before that. The age of Leo recurs every 25,920 years. So the astronomy doesn't absolutely commit us to the date of 12,500 years ago, but what does, I think, commit us to the date of 12,500 years ago is the geology, the way that the Sphinx is measured, and the fact that that was a very rainy period in Egypt. If you wind back the ancient skies to 10,500 BC, you go over to Giza and you find that two constellations are modeled on the ground there. One is the constellation of Orion, the belt stars of Orion in the positioning of the three great pyramids, and the other is the constellation of Leo with the great Sphinx gazing due east. And the strangest thing is that you again get a lock, not in 2,500 BC when Giza is supposed to have been created. None of it works then. You have to go back 12,500 years to 10,500 BC to get Leo locking perfectly with the Sphinx at dawn on the spring equinox. It's the age of Leo. It's as though the lion-bodied Sphinx is looking at its own celestial counterpart in the sky, and the constellation of Orion due south on the meridian in exactly the pattern of the three pyramids on the ground. And that only happens 12,500 years ago.
Could the Sphinx and the pyramids have been built at the same time? If so, could the ancient civilization that built it be marking a very important time for our current human race?
Now, with modern computer software, we can look at the ancient skies in any period we wish. It's interesting when we switch from geology to astronomy, and we start looking at the Sphinx and the pyramids as astronomically connected monuments. And we can't do otherwise, because the Sphinx, as I mentioned, is perfectly aligned on due east. Perfect. That's the work of people who are studying the sky.
The temple has to be a mirror image of the cosmos. In other words, you have to represent what you're actually looking at. A great example, of course, is the Sphinx. Looks at its mirror image on the horizon at the spring equinox, 10,500 BC. Boom.
Robert Schoch challenges the conventional explanation behind the Sphinx being constructed in 2500 BC.
It's been claimed that the face of the Sphinx is the face of the pharaoh Khafra or Chephren, so that would date to 2500 BC. But all of this is really very circumstantial. I think there's a very good possibility that the Sphinx was not a Sphinx originally, but it was a lion. So a lion's body with a lion's head, that the human head is a reconstruction or recarving. Maybe the head's been recarved more than once. But if you think about it as a lion, during the age of Leo, at the end of the last ice age, circa 10,000 or so BC, you had the Sphinx facing its essentially own image in the sky on the vernal equinox. And I think this was something that may have been incredibly significant.
What would be the purpose of such a marker at the Giza Plateau? Is there an unseen power that generations later tried to capture?
The idea of a lion image as an important sacred notion in a solar worshiping culture is completely understandable. First of all, the constellations in the heavens, so we're looking upward for inspiration. And the image of a lion is a very strong, courageous, noble quality. So to put the head of a pharaoh on the body of a lion is to acknowledge that the pharaoh has these great, powerful qualities. This is carved out of bedrock. Not only is the leader's energy united with the image of a lion, it is also united with the earth. So we have powerful imagery of integration going on in the great Sphinx of Giza.
Could there be a different kind of power we haven't yet been able to understand attached with the Sphinx and the Giza Plateau?
Well, it's bizarre. I mean, these are gigantic monuments, left totally uninscribed, not even the name of the supposed pharaoh. No architect's name, nothing. It doesn't have hieroglyphs, it doesn't have inscriptions. But they do speak once you understand that the language that is being incorporated, or the designer who used the language, used mathematics and astronomy.
If the Sphinx was a powerful image built only to reflect its magnificence from the surface of the earth to its celestial home, why would it be uninscribed? why would the creators not explain its purpose? That answer might lie below its feet. Robert Schoch describes how his investigations led him to another significant discovery.
Below the Sphinx, I was looking for subsurface weathering features, mineralogical changes. We also found a number of anomalies. One of the anomalies, probably the most important and significant, is under the left paw of the Sphinx. And it is, for as what we can tell from the seismic, I'm quite convinced that it is a cavity, but not a natural cavity, artificial cavity or chamber under the left paw. Our initial analysis indicates that there is something in it, so it's not an empty cavity.
John Anthony West and Robert Schoch, in the very brief period that they had access to the Sphinx, they ran side-scan sonar survey all around it. And what was discovered beneath the left forepaw of the Sphinx, down at a depth of about 30 or 40 feet into the bedrock beneath the left forepaw of the Sphinx, is a very large, clearly man-made chamber. As soon as the Egyptian authorities discovered what they were really doing, they threw them off the site, and they weren't allowed to continue with their work. Do perhaps the Egyptian authorities or the Egyptian archaeologists and their colleagues in Western archaeology, do they perhaps already know? I mean, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, but there have subsequently been drilling and investigation projects under the Sphinx, which have been passed off as being to do with clearing groundwater from under the Sphinx. But I wonder if that's what they were really doing. I don't think we're being told the whole truth about what is happening at Giza.
If that might be true, could the Great Sphinx be guarding human behavior recorded for thousands or millions of years?
One thing I would anticipate finding, if there is something in those chambers beneath the Sphinx, is the records of those earlier civilizations that existed on this planet. Plato, the Greek philosopher, said that the Greek lawmaker Solon once went to Egypt, and he was speaking with one of the Egyptian high priests. And the Egyptian high priest asked about the history of the Greek people. And Solon said, in the beginning, humans were created, then there was a big flood, a big catastrophe, and after that, they were created again. And the Egyptian priest began laughing. He explained to Solon that actually there have been many devastations in the long history of the world, and the earth has been repopulated again and again and again over the course of many millions of years. And he said, you Greeks just remember the last one, but there have been many before that. And he said to Solon, you've lost the records of these earlier histories. The Egyptian priest said, we have those records of those earlier histories.
These things that are still there underground were so vast that he was really perplexed, and he asked the Egyptian priest who was taking him around, who built these things? And their reply to him was, they were built by the crocodile kings. Now that might be a perfect definition of what the Anunnaki were, because we do see a lot of depictions of them with reptilian features and things like that. It may be at one point whoever built that chamber and hid what I believe might be the Hall of Records of the Egyptian priesthood, then chose to actually bury that up. We might find writings from them, tablets, ways of using their knowledge that they knew we wouldn't be able to get to until a certain point in our evolution where we would be able to get down to these chambers and pull out what was there.
If there really is a chamber guarding the secrets of humanity, why haven't we been allowed to have it? Graham Sear explains that the Sphinx tests the soul before it can be embodied in the great knowing.
The Sphinx, to me, represents kind of the holder of esoteric knowledge and the mystery of existence. It's sort of the watcher at the gates to heaven who tests the soul on their merit before they're able to re-enter the garden. It's sort of like the cherubim who, with the flaming swords, guard the entrance to Eden. to make sure that the soul is pure enough to re-enter. So that's one aspect of the Sphinx. To me, it also kind of represents the integration of angelic natures with human natures.
If the Sphinx does mark the gateway to secret knowledge about our planet, left by an ancient high civilization, then could it be that, by design, it is intended to remain dormant until modern civilization is ready to see the universe differently? Graham Hancock suggests this question is partially answered by understanding the symbolism in Egyptian artworks.
The ancient Egyptians had I think, a beautiful way of looking at human life. This was a forgiving culture. They understood human frailty. We are not perfect. We do not enter life perfect. We are going to make mistakes. And the question is, do we learn from those mistakes? What do we do with the lessons that duality has to teach us? Do we integrate those lessons into our life subsequently, or do we just ignore them and carry on as before?
Now, these sites are very controversial. All of them are, because they force historians to rethink the traditional story. When we begin to look at a cyclic model of civilization rather than the linear model that says civilization began 5,000 years ago, it opens the door to explanations to many of the things that look simply mysterious to us and make no sense at all, such as the discovery of entire cities under the surface of the ocean that we find in multiple places throughout the world.
If the great ancient knowledge in the chamber below the paw of the Sphinx is inaccessible, perhaps the same knowledge may exist in a different location, or even in a different frequency. Healer and author Sonia Grace describes a mystical encounter meeting the ancient solar deity Sekhmet during a remote vision.
When I spirit traveled to the Great Sphinx, it was back in time. My guides took me, and we arrived around 15,000 BC. We were met by Sekhmet herself. She was standing there. She's huge. She's like 20 feet tall. She's enormous. And she invited us inside and took us down, going into the earth, a long tunnel, this deep tunnel passageway. It went this way, it went that way, it went this way again, and it opened out into a huge room. And she said, this was the portal for my people. She says, my people came here long before the Egyptian gods. She said this Sphinx was a carving of a lion. It was not the dog Anubis, it was a lion. And she said it's because we come from the Leo constellation, and it was created as a site for her people, meaning X marks the spot, this is the portal. So this is where her people would literally transport to where they were from in the Leo constellation.
If the Sphinx and the Great Pyramid are just the tip of the iceberg of our understanding of humanity on this planet, could their existence be a reminder to dig deeper? But when, if ever, will this knowledge be available to all mankind?
For all its technology and all its progress and all the amazing stuff we have, we live in a very fractured, very dangerous world right now, where the whole of human achievement could be put at jeopardy by, for example, a massive nuclear war. We have the toys to do that, to bring humanity back to the Stone Age in a matter of days, and it's possible that we could do so. That we don't really know why we're here or what we're doing. We have an illusion about what it is. And that illusion is locked deep in the past. That's where it began. And we need to recover the truth about ourselves.
Could the knowledge preserved be by the clan of Osiris? Is there a link between the Egyptian gods and Enki's mission to help mankind's advancement towards a higher culture? Could that specific knowledge be below the Sphinx?
The Great Pyramid in particular contains mathematical, sort of mathematical code. We know for sure, for example, that astronomy and mathematics were used. The question is why. It's a sort of, well, it's a universal language. If ever we are contacted, or we contact extraterrestrials somewhere else in the cosmos, the only way we can communicate is through mathematics and astronomy. Astronomy will give them location, so GPS if you like, and mathematics will be the dialogue between us. So this monument is speaking ET, if you like. It's actually speaking a universal language. We have to come to terms with that, and we have to ask the question, is it something that developed purely earthbound, or is it a contact? The questions are legitimate today.
Maybe once we tap into a different dimension, we will be able to read the code. Some believe there are locations on the planet that open portals to another dimension of our current reality.
What we do know is in places like the Cairo Museum in Egypt, a number of artifacts have been found from sites such as Saqqara, for example, that scientists simply cannot explain.
Astrophysicists Duncan Lorimer and Maura McLaughlin stumbled upon a strangely flickering star. Its radiation pulsed so brightly, they were unable to match it to any known object in the universe. As the story made the headlines, scientists around the world were baffled. Then, astronomers at the Green Bank Telescope confirmed that these light signals were emanating from a star in the Cygnus constellation, 1,200 light-years away. This fluctuating star was catalogued KIC 8462852 and named Tabby Star in honor of Tabitha Suzanne Boyajian, the first astronomer who wrote about it.
Amongst the 100,000 stars, it was dipping its light, or flux as they call it, periodically. Now this is something which happens if a planet moves in front of a star. You get a very slight dip in the amount of light that's reaching us. In this case, the dips were anything up to 22%. Now, if I can put this into perspective, if, let's say, Jupiter, the largest planet in our solar system, crosses in front of the Sun, if you were looking at it from afar, it would dip the light only about 1%. So something that was dipping the light anything up to 22% is going to be huge, massive, something that is totally different, something that we've not encountered before in astronomy. So what was going on?
Since 2015, the answer to this question has garnered the attention of astronomers, scientists, and space enthusiasts alike. And a myriad of explanations have been offered, but none have been conclusive. What is really odd about this mystery is that, uncharacteristically, even the most staunch scientists have not discounted a popular hypothesis that the expansive object interrupting Tabby Star's brightness could be built by an advanced spacefaring civilization. Astoundingly, the BBC have even released a documentary advocating this theory. Could it really be true?
Then in 2016, a new burst was detected. The distinctive pulse of radio waves released as the neutron stars collided and were destroyed, followed by nothing. Silence.
The BBC have shown for the first time a documentary not just about this star, but the fact that it almost certainly has an ET vessel, alien megastructure around it. We're not just talking about bacteria, we are talking about advanced civilizations, thousands of years more advanced than us down here on Earth. The question comes is that if there really is a structure around this star, how does it affect us down here? I mean, is it possible that these aliens have been in touch with us in some way in the recent past, or perhaps even in the distant past? And the question comes down to communication. The star is approximately 1,300 light years from our solar system, which means that when we're looking towards it, anything we see happened 1,300 years ago. So that's around 700 AD. You know, the Maya civilization was still in full flight. When they look at us, of course, they are also looking at that same time frame, around 700 AD.
Linda Moulton Howe's theory suggests that the Mayan civilization was created in a hybridized program and then simply disappeared, possibly off-planet. Oddly enough, this connects to the same time frame with the Tabby star. Could there be an ancient civilization that once lived on Earth, trying to connect with us?
I will be sought out by some people who have worked for the CIA, NSA, DIA. There was a man who had said that he had worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, and he said that was the Mayan civilization created in a hybridized program, that there was a collaboration teaching that all of the mathematical skills from history. Then in 850 AD, it wasn't drought. It wasn't human war. This man said to me, for reasons unknown, the Ebens came in 850 AD, and they took the majority of their hybridized Mayans in a large craft and left Earth.
Could the Mayan disappearance and the Tabby star anomaly be linked? Or could this mystery in the sky actually have a more ancient connection? An ancient connection that some believe taps into the codes of our planet.
Those astronomers, they also said that these dips in the light could also be used to broadcast information, whether this information be binary, whether it be prime numbers, or some other form of attention-seeking information, which a species like ourselves, humanity, could recognise as intelligent, as universal information. The work that I'm carrying out suggests that there is intelligence in the broadcasts, and that it may well be that it is giving us not just prime numbers or binary, but very specific mathematical formula. What I have determined is that there are certain cycles associated with the Kepler data. They are all interlinked, and they all reflect certain key numbers. All of them are multiples of 11. Now, this may be just a very simple piece of information, but what's so interesting is that we find that this is associated with the most complex mathematical formula that we have down here on Earth. For instance, Pascal's triangle is made up of multiples of 11. It's like a pyramid of numbers, the first number being 1, the second number being 11, the third number being 121, the fourth number being 1331, 11 squared, 11 cubed, etc., etc. These are exactly the same numbers that are being broadcast from the KIC star right at this moment. This is where it gets weird, because the Great Pyramid is obviously one of the greatest enigmas of the ancient world. Certain researchers, colleagues, have found within it certain key numbers that keep cropping up again and again. And those numbers are the exact numbers that are being broadcast by this star, KIC 8462852. Is this a coincidence? The Great Pyramid and its two neighbours are aligned to exactly the same constellation as where this star is, which is Cygnus.
And yet, just 1,000 miles northeast, another megalithic site that is much older also points to the Cygnus constellation. In fact, it's the largest and oldest megalithic site on Earth, Gobekli Tepe.
Is it also a coincidence that the oldest complex of stone monuments in the world at Gobekli Tepe in southeast Turkey is also aligned to the constellation of Cygnus? Is it also a coincidence that in some of the oldest cave art around the world we find evidence of this same constellation represented by celestial birds, by birdmen, birds on poles that are pointed and directed towards this constellation?
I wish we could get into the minds and into the heads of the people who made these sites all over the world in megalithic structures, that they're all concerned with lining themselves up to the rising point of the sun at certain times of the year. They're telling us something about our connection to the cosmos and our place on Earth.
Could Gobekli Tepe, the oldest megalithic structure on the planet, be revealing a code that would connect us not only to this anomaly in the sky, but also to other ancient sites around the world? Translated into English, Gobekli Tepe means pot-bellied hill. In 1994, Klaus Schmidt, an archaeologist from Germany, began digging into this unnatural-looking bluff. A few feet below the surface, he discovered stone ruins. Further investigation revealed that this ancient formation in southern Turkey was 7,000 years older than Stonehenge, throwing into question much of what has been written in the history books. Klaus Schmidt dedicated his life's work to uncovering what might lie below the surface and continued to excavate until he, mysteriously, died in 2014. 95% of the ruins are still buried, and the true purpose of Gobekli Tepe and its relationship to the galaxy is still an unsolved mystery.
Most archaeologists believe the site is about 13,000 years old, and they believe it existed for a couple of thousand years, and then it was deliberately buried. Now, as far as I'm concerned, it could date back much further than that, because there is evidence in Turkey that humans like us existed millions of years ago.
Gregg Braden points out that more evidence is being uncovered, pushing back the date of antiquity. Could Gobekli Tepe be even older?
One of the consequences of global warming is that the ice on the poles has receded tremendously, including Antarctica. And the thickness of the ice, as it is reduced, allows greater visibility from Earth-penetrating radar, so we can see what's underneath the ice. But one of the surprises is that the satellite images are sending back now what appear to be large-scale, complex archaeological sites. So they're not small hunting villages and pit houses. These look like advanced technological civilizations that we're seeing underneath the ice. So as a scientist, I have to say one of two things happened. Either someone built these complex structures under the ice after it already formed, which is less likely, and the more likely scenario is that the structures existed and then the ice covered them. Right now, civilization, the date is being pushed back to 13,500 years. The last ice age ended 12,000 years ago. The historic context of civilizations going back 50, 60, 70,000 years along these 5,000-year cycles shows up in the mythology. Maybe the mythology is based on much more fact than we've been led to believe in the past, or that we've been willing to embrace in the past.
If indeed it could be older than mainstream scientists believe, then what could be its purpose?
Gobekli Tepe is the oldest stone circle complex in the world. If you can imagine Stonehenge in England and transpose it onto the top of a mountaintop in southeast Turkey, and then multiply it by at least 20 times, and then cover the stones with beautiful carvings of animals and representations of abstract humans, and give them T-shaped tops, because that's what the stones have there. This is what Gobekli is. It was constructed at the very end of the last ice age, around 9,500 BC, and was in use for a period of around 1,500 years before it was abandoned about 8,000 BC. What's so interesting is that the oldest and the most accomplished, technologically advanced stone enclosures, and that alone gives us evidence of possibly a lost civilization. The fact is that Gobekli Tepe is in northern Mesopotamia. The area around Urfa and Haran and Gobekli Tepe, this is clearly the cradle of civilization. This is where the Anunnaki had their power base.
I am on a trip with geologist Robert Schoch, who had his PhD in Yale University, and we are standing down inside of the excavation at Gobekli Tepe, surrounded by these 19-foot tall limestone pillars, each weighed up to 15 tons. And they're in rings. And in that process of standing there and talking about this is the most baffling place. It doesn't feel like anything that humans can understand. Robert Schoch said, I've been staring at these T structures and thinking about the old past and what could this have been built for? And he said, all of these limestone pillars have T tops. And he said, it reminds me of tuning forks. And he said, Linda, when you stand up at the top of the hill and you realize that Gobekli Tepe was built in a bowl, you're always looking down at the top of these big T-pillars unless you climb down into, and then you're among them. And he said, what if this whole place was built to resonate with certain frequencies by something above, resonating frequencies on big pillars put in rings?
When you look at Gobekli Tepe and you see all of the constructions of the inscriptions of all of the animals of the earth on these giant pillars, it's always been interesting to me that perhaps what these things were a way of recording a standing wave pattern of a certain kind of a life form. For instance, a crocodile exists on a different standing wave pattern than a crane, than an elephant, than a monkey. And perhaps what they were trying to do was, out of a state of preservation, trying to preserve these things, they were trying to preserve stones that actually had those frequencies recorded into them.
Could Gobekli Tepe have been an ancient portal constructed to communicate with gods in faraway galaxies? Is it possible that Tabby's star could be a signal for humans to pay attention to this gateway?
There is, for example, evidence of very clear, very precise astronomy at Gobekli Tepe. It contains, amongst other things, the world's first perfectly north-south aligned building. You can't do that without astronomy. There are alignments to specific star groups and specific moments of the year. It's a highly evolved site.
Shamanic cultures right the way across the Eurasian continent saw the northern celestial pole as the point of exit from the physical world and the point of entry into the sky world. And it was seen as a whole, quite literally a whole, connecting the different universes, the middle world to the upper world. It would seem as if this stone is a signboard showing that journey and the actual course, the route that you would take to reach the sky world. I believe that one of the indicators to our earliest ancestors of a place of great power was the appearance of mysterious lights. It's known that a lot of strange light phenomena is seen in those very mountains where Gobekli Tepe is sighted. We call them UFOs today, but these type of phenomena have been occurring for many, many thousands of years, arguably since the beginning. I think that our ancestors would have seen these as important signs that here were places where you could establish points of contact, portals if you like, with the other world, and that by building your monuments here, that link with the stars would be stronger. The downloads of information that create civilization would be stronger. Pillar 43 at Gobekli Tepe is a signboard for the shaman who would be achieving altered states of consciousness within the enclosures and then journeying in an astral form to the upper world.
Perhaps a deeper understanding of the relationship of these ancient monuments to Tabby star and other galaxies is the key to understanding who built them and why.
You know, I've not examined aerial views of Gobekli Tepe, but the fact that some people, some researchers are equating that with a star map that depicts our relationship would be a perfect match for not only the Egyptian culture, but for what we've discovered in the construction of the pyramids themselves and the fact that this harmonic relationship exists between this star. And it could very well be that what that cosmology was meant to encapsulate and describe is this idea that our star is interacting harmonically with these other stellar bodies. And it could be that this ancient extraterrestrial race that came to visit here not only understood that, but are following that as a sort of harmonic map around the universe.
If it is indeed true that Gobekli Tepe is a gateway to other galaxies, then perhaps somehow its architects knew a global catastrophe was imminent and buried this ancient technology to protect it.
As the excavations continued, a number of surprising things began to become clear. First off, this pot-bellied hill and this whole site had not been covered up by natural sedimentation. After being in use for about 1,000 years, it was deliberately buried by whoever was involved with it. This was not some invading army who came in and smashed it up. This was in a kind of preservation. You must envisage teams of hundreds of people with sort of buckets filled with stone and rubble, and they're coming and they're pouring it in on top of the existing stone circles. And they just keep on pouring until every stone circle is covered.
Could the knowledge that has been covered up preserved the mythology from almost every ancient culture?
Gobekli Tepe is a kind of it's like a potpourri of cultures. You see a lot of Sumerian influence. There's a lot of Egyptian symbolism in Gobekli Tepe as well. There's Hindu influence in there as well, Japanese. And the fact is, this is where you start getting into this gray area. Where does it come from? Was there a world book, a central point where everybody got their ideas from? It seems to me that Gobekli Tepe is almost like a microcosm of so many cultures around the world that supposedly never shared information with each other. And now we begin to realize actually they got around much more than we gave them credit for.
Could the big secret at Gobekli Tepe be the connection of every culture from around the world? And could it have been discovered at the right time to reveal information? There are many who believe uncovering the answers to these questions will transform how we understand ourselves.
I would be lying if I said I knew what was exactly buried at Gobekli Tepe, but I think what you can do is draw a lot of similarities and parallels to some of these other megalithic sites and get some pretty decent scientific insight into what they were trying to accomplish. And what it looks like they were trying to accomplish is the preservation of this scientific knowledge, maybe at a time when there was just such global upheaval that the only way to preserve it was to bury it. Could very well be why they purposely buried the entire site. You're going to construct a megalithic site of that kind of grandeur and scale and put that kind of effort into it, and then you're going to turn around and just bury it. Why would any society do that?
But whoever built Gobekli Tepe, the fact that they buried that very important 30 acres of these rings, of all of these limestone columns, meant somebody, something knew that something potentially destructive to the whole planet and they didn't want Gobekli Tepe destroyed. But Gobekli Tepe survived until the 1990s.
Although Gobekli Tepe's discovery in 1990 was groundbreaking, research has been problematic given the dangerous upheaval in the area and the knowledge that still stays buried. But perhaps the discovery of the Tabby star has become a beacon for knowledge still preserved at Gobekli Tepe, pointing us in a direction to uncover some human truths.
I think it is our responsibility to preserve those records that are being destroyed in this cradle of civilization, in the Tigris-Euphrates, in Iraq, in Syria, in Turkey, because they are very intentionally being destroyed in some cases to wipe out the memory of these past civilizations for a number of reasons. But once they're gone forever. And I think it's very sad to see what's happening, and I think it's a wake-up call. We've taken for granted for so long the fact that these records are here and that they exist. We never really considered that they could be destroyed so easily.
If they actually got the funding and got the effort and they excavated the rest of that 95% of that site, I'm pretty sure what it's going to do is answer a whole lot of mysteries about these other megalithic sites. And the reason why I say that is because here's a site that's completely preserved, as far as we know. It may be an actual perfect construction of the science that they were trying to save. And if that ends up being the case, then I think what you'll see is a resurgence all through humanity and a real effort to try to rediscover what it was that we're now missing, that we are a species living with amnesia of what this science was. And it's simply because we've had such a turbulent history as a species, war after cataclysm after cataclysm, the Library of Alexandria being burned. All of those things mean that we've lost more knowledge maybe than we even possess right now. And a lot of that knowledge, when you really begin to study these ancient sites, can be regained. And I'm hoping that's what takes place with Gobekli Tepe. We've got a lot of mysterious cities built out of stone around the world, but that kind of structure, and only 5% of it has been excavated, means that below that is such a massive amount to be found.
I think Gobekli Tepe has many more secrets to reveal. The astronomy of the site is something that a number of researchers are beginning to look into, and I think that's going to be one of the keys to help us understand what was going on at Gobekli Tepe. But there's nothing to beat plain old-fashioned excavation, and that site needs to be dug up. I feel that Gobekli Tepe is potentially so important for unraveling the origins of our present civilizations that we really need to expose the whole site and understand absolutely what's going on there. It may change many things about how we view ourselves and our past.
There's something more beyond that, that some part of us comes from the stars themselves, and that at the point of incarnation, that something, we call it the soul or the spirit, embodies within flesh and blood and exists. And that this gives us this connection to the stars, that the soul or spirit actually comes from an extraterrestrial or a starry source.
What else lies buried inside the pot-bellied grounds at Gobekli Tepe? Are there more secrets about the true origins of mankind to be unearthed? Are we being prompted by the communication with Tabby Star to dig deeper and connect with these ancient sites? Could there be some kind of code that interlocks celestial locations with monuments on Earth? Would it be possible Gobekli Tepe could be the ultimate smoking gun when it comes to connecting these ancient monuments across the globe and the truth on why they exist? And could it reveal a message that helps us understand our current civilization and how to continue humanity on this planet? Researchers continue to gather data, but the answer may still lie buried beneath the dirt. As the unraveling of these mysteries continue, some interesting evidence begins to emerge from some unusual locations. One such place has one of the largest stones carved by human hands at 1,650 tons.
Baalbek is one of the big enigmas of which there is very little answers. We're talking about a huge complex.
Around the Temple of Jupiter, there used to be 54 columns. 54, what's the significance of that?
Could this number sequence help reveal a code at Baalbek? And is it possible it could be more evidence of an ancient message?